Super. Thank you very much. Okay, hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here presenting on behalf of Divyanshu, who unfortunately couldn't acquire a visa, so is not joining us for the conference. So the key issue here, this module redesign that's taken place over a number of years, I happened to deliver this module myself for 12 years, and Divyanshu delivered it last year. The key issue is student engagement, and the better students are always fine, but the weaker students in this class, I felt that they were not leaving with a level of technical competency from with regard to material that I was happy with, and for them to go out into industry. These are fifth-year students, so students in their final year of their master's program, and I was not happy with the level of technical understanding that many of those students had leaving the module. So I wanted to address that. Okay. Right, so some context. It's a 5 ECTS module, and I packed a lot in there. So we'll go through the details in a moment. So the cohort were primarily energy systems engineering students with a few mechanical engineering students. So energy systems engineering are essentially hybrid students between mechanical and electrical engineering. They focus on integrating renewables with the grid and all of the other energy systems that are at play in a given region. Okay, so they're a very focused cohort, and they're generally quite strong students. The format of the module then has a number of lectures, as you would expect, covering a lot of building physics principles. I'll go through those details in a moment. But also what I want to really focus on today is the nature of the renovation project, and that's done through a building energy simulation tool. I've used various versions of interfaces for Energy Plus, and more recently we've moved to IES. So I show an example here of a building. So we give the students a building, and they are given a massive design space through the renovation challenge for the building. So groups of 2 or 3 students are they're all given the same building, but they must place it in a different location around the world. That creates an enormous number of issues. And we acknowledge that the building is not fit for purpose in certain climates, but they must do the best they can to renovate the building, being cognizant of 20-year payback period and many other factors along the way, particularly paying attention to greenhouse gas emissions and so on, local tariffs, local incentives, and so on and so on. Okay, so I previously had a 60% of the module went to the end of semester exam. Then I moved that to 50% to try and further incentivize the students to focus on the project component. So I really felt that the project component should reinforce the learnings from the lecture material, and we'll look at that in a moment. Okay, so the numbers we're dealing with. So many of the students, too big a cohort from my opinion, were scoring a C+ grade or lower, and that was significant. You can feel that in the class, and you can, as a proxy, I was using engagement to essentially, you can only predict who's going to score what in the project based on their level of engagement throughout the semester. Okay, and I want to just highlight one thing here, and it's a quote from one of my new colleagues. With the type of project we're running, and it kind of runs over the 12 weeks of the semester, it's really important that students engage throughout the 12 weeks. You can't just cram it at the end. The students who try and kind of cram in the week leading into the final submission of the report and the presentation, they do terribly, because you cannot execute energy simulation models in depth and really query the results coming from the energy models if you just leave it to the last minute. It just doesn't work that way. I also want to say here, like my motivation, I felt that right at the start of COVID, like there was a problem. Then I had a particularly weak class, which was followed by just a regular weak class. And I said, right, this isn't on. I need to address this in detail, and I'm going to spend the rest of my presentation discussing that. One last thing, I think the nadir of the situation occurred during a graduation ceremony when I was cornered by 2 parents of a student who asked me why their excellent daughter in this case, scored so well in all the other modules except mine, and it was my fault. And I was just like, wow. And the student had attended 10% of my lectures. There's nothing I can do with that. So you need to attend and stay with it. And I've communicated this clearly throughout the 12 years I've been delivering this module. Okay. In terms of the course content, looking at the introduction to just buildings in general and why they're so important for society, looking at the role of climate and changing climate and how we need to be cognizant of that, particularly in light of, say, the new, say, residential building standards in Ireland. We now have an overheating problem, a cooling issue. We're not set up in Ireland to deal with cooling, say, for 2.2 million residential homes. You know, how can we address that in maybe passive ways instead of everybody having to buy air conditioning? Also look at some elements of indoor air quality and indoor environmental quality, daylighting included. Buildings energy balance, particularly with renewable energy systems. The students are very strong in this area already. We look at the building envelope, heat and moisture transfer through the building envelope, natural ventilation, and also in detail psychometric chart theory and analysis, and some elements of HVAC control. But what you notice here is that all of the elements feed into the project, and all of those elements can be examined in different media, be it through the final report, final presentation, or the final exam themselves. So they're all summative components. I was absolutely cognizant of the way that we typically deliver lecture material and course content. So from the teacher perspective, you know, we're thinking about learning outcomes. We design our teaching and learning activities and also have an eye on assessment at the end of the year. But if you talk to the students, they have a very different view on the same content. They really aren't too pushed about teaching and learning activities or learning outcomes. They're really focusing on assessment. So, and you know, that's what they are there for. Well, what do I need to do to get the grade in this particular module? So I was trying to think of this and how can I ensure that the students achieve the learning outcomes while focusing on the assessment. Okay, so I introduced what's called a threshold concept, and in this case, it's an overarching concept for the module that if the students can break through that kind of liminal space that exists before understanding a threshold concept, that they can actually get a better view of a deeper understanding of the module content. In this case, it's essentially buildings, a system of systems approach to building energy. And I think that's very, very important. And I've incorporated elements of that throughout the assessment. If the student comes up with a particular solution, why and what impacts does that have on other elements of the building, and have you considered X, Y, and Z based on the information you're presenting to me? So maybe a rather simplified view then of the module content from a student perspective, looking at the fundamental physics of heat transfer, a little bit of thermodynamics with respect to, say, heat pumps operation, systems of controls, psychometrics again, and what the students really love is the economic performance analysis. It's a rudimentary NPV calculation, but it does focus the minds of the students because they do need to deliver the report and make recommendations that they can stand over for a given client. The project is evaluated over a 20-year life cycle. So I decomposed the module into a set of key learning objectives and key concepts, but it all starts from this green box in the top left-hand corner. How can I ensure deep learning throughout the module? So I don't need to go through all of these components, but it took me a while to put this together, and you can see the kind of the graph type thinking with the, you know, establishing the relationships between the different components, and again the threshold concept is of paramount importance in the context of all the different components to feed into this module. Okay, so then looking at the constructive alignment of assessment, and I'm just going to focus your attention. We all have the summative of the end of year exam, looking at the different components. But what I found here was I think I can do a little laser in the bottom right hand corner. Ooh. No, I'm not going to do that. I've been logged out. Please. I wanted the laser, it's control out, I pressed the wrong button. Sorry for that. So the key issue, thank you very much.
You want to have the item?
That's okay. That's okay. So in the bottom right-hand corner, I introduced some formative assessment components during the module. So primarily a report that was of no weighting. It was just for feedback about the midpoint in the module. What it did was it really focused the students. It gave them a kick if they weren't working to the level required. And it also provided very, very valuable information for them and advice on how to proceed in the second half of the module itself. That was a key issue. The other thing from a project-based learning perspective, and given the breadth of the exercise here, is that I met with them on a weekly basis. And particularly if any of you are engaged in problem-based learning activities, you need to have a level of expertise in the room with the students. You can't just leave it to teaching assistants. It's very, very important that the students receive the right advice and to focus their efforts essentially. Okay, so that's here in the black dot here, week 7. That gives them pretty much 5 weeks to focus on value-added activities over the course of the module itself. Okay, so just looking here at the rubric again, I think the nature of the evaluation, the final report for the project has been, as I said, it's a report, a presentation, and an oral interview. So there's quite a lot in it. I've had a lot of help from my colleague Donal with respect to the interview, and the students are interrogated in detail as to why they have made certain decisions during the renovation process and can they stand over those. So I'll let you be the judge. Have all of my interventions made a difference? Look here on the left-hand side. So we're looking at the cohort from say 2014 to 2021. And we see a median value here of around 73% and a significant interquartile range. And then we just see here from the other side, the median remained the same post intervention measures, but our interquartile range narrows. My gut feeling is that the students have done better since the poor COVID years, much better in some places. I am overall happier with the general level in the class, particularly in the last year that I delivered the module. And that's my key feedback. It's been a lot of work, and it is in a better place. I think the students have a better experience for it. I've had some very positive feedback from students who've gone into industry and said, I've been able to use the content in X, Y, and Z location or in such a scenario. So that has been quite encouraging. Okay, I just wrap up now. Key learnings from it, essentially software friction, using those energy simulation design tools for building geometry, using Design Builder, it's buggy, using Symergy was a little buggy. Let's just remove all of that from the students' activity and just give them the building instead, and it saved a lot of time and a lot of stress. Okay, so the threshold concept was a key issue, clearly articulated, presented milestones, model building was removed, and then just introducing that quality gate made a huge difference as well. So I'll leave you with this, and that's the final way I wrapped up the module, just with the structure, how all of the different components relate to each other, and how they feed into each other with respect to lecture topics, learning milestones, progress milestones, and assessment details, be they formative or summative. So I'll wrap up with that. Thank you very much for your time and attention.